And there's a debate that has been raging since 4th of August. This is just this Sunday about, is it Founders Day or Founders Day? Yes, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, there's one with the apostrophe just before the S and the other one with the apostrophe after the S. But it is a big historical debate, but also has implications for now. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking to Dr. Sekou Nkrumah, the son of Dr. Nkrumah, is my guest tonight. But why is this whole debate emerging now? Well, we celebrated the Founders Day, and I mean the Founders Day with the apostrophe after the S on Sunday, and that has become quite a very contentious subject. It's always been since this government decided to make that particular change. And you see here the question about whether you're celebrating only Nkrumah, as in what we used to do with his birthday, or you're celebrating the Big Six. And by the way, he was part of the Big Six anyway. The president's argument is that it is a collective struggle that was waged towards independence, and you do not have to celebrate only one person. Let's acknowledge everybody else, and let's celebrate and mark their contributions and recognize that as part of our march towards independence, which really many have said has just been an argument to downplay and undermine his contributions to our independence. And if you place that in the context of what we've seen in the political scene recently with the NDC and the MPP all fighting over Nkrumah's legacy, it becomes very important within the context of the elections campaign that is currently being waged. And you've seen already in the last month the vice presidential candidate of the MPP quoting significant controversy when he compared the current president to Dr. Nkrumah. That in itself tells us where we are in the political spectrum and the debate around this anytime this is mentioned. And then when you throw in a holiday and what the president says, we'll come to that, that already becomes a big deal. And then you look at how we've come and how far we've come on this particular side. That this government came in, and after the time, the 21st of September, which is Nkrumah's birthday, was one that we celebrated as a national holiday. And then they said, well, why don't you change that? And they did change it to 4th of August, 2 days. They were really marking the day that we know between 1989 and 1947, talking about the foundation of independence, the formation of the Aborigines Right Protection Society in 1897, and then they're talking about the UGCC's formation in 1947. The president believes that is what you should be celebrating and marking on this particular day, because it is a signal to how far we've come, the collective march towards independence, and we need to recognize that. So really, what's the issue? Why can't we simply celebrate this? Because all the contributors to the struggle have an agenda towards independence. The approach was different. There was the self-government now that the CPP, through Nkrumah, was championing. And then you have the UGCC self-government in the shortest possible time. But in the end, they all wanted independence. So why this debate? Is it even necessary? It's our collective history. So definitely it is. Let's have that with a man who knew Nkrumah very well, is his son, and has a very interesting take on all this, and that would interrogate when we sit for a conversation. And by the way, JB Nanko makes a very important point that, by the way, has now been pulled out of the archives and has been circulated in the last 48 hours to make the point that he and his lot that belong to the UGCC and this ideal of the shortest possible time independence, they were really opposed to the radical approach that Nkrumah took, that many believe really got us the independence. And left to him and the likes of him in the UGCC, who stayed back to fight gradually, we wouldn't have had independence when we had it. Many actually even argue we wouldn't have had independence at all. He makes the point. We of the UGCC met and turned down Nkrumah's challenge flat as an invitation to criminal conspiracy against law and order. And Nkrumah, obviously, as you know, took a very radical stance against the colonial powers and moved the train quickly ahead towards our independence on 1957. So that then becomes the basis for a bit more controversy that we've seen this week. But Akufo-Addo then delivers his national address, and he says a few very important things, very, very controversial, rejecting, he says, emphatically, any notion that one man was responsible for independence. And he was very, very clear that that can be a position that we take. And that Nkrumah's birthday, he says, has been memorialized, and that should be enough to celebrate the man himself. That obviously is not enough for people. And our history is at play here. We'll pick Sekou Nkrumah's thoughts when he joins us for a conversation here on PM Express. Stay with me. And thank you all for joining us here on PM Express. My guest is already with us and is joining us via Zoom because he's joining us from the United States of America. Dr. Sekou Nkrumah, thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express.
Good evening to you and to your listeners.
Great to have you.
And viewers too.
Yes, and great to have you. As always, PM Express is brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough, and I always recommend Syntex Tanks to you because it is a tank that offers you bespoke options across the country. And indeed, they have 7 years warranty. No other tank has that. So you want to call them 0244-335-168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. And Dr. Nkrumah, I want to start first of all, I'm just out of curiosity. As a son of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, how do you feel each year when we go through this constant cycle of debate over your father's legacy and his role in our independence struggle?
Yes, first of all, I think when you were introducing me earlier, you said a man who knows Nkrumah very well and so on. And surprisingly, I didn't know Nkrumah at all. I was 2 years old when he was overthrown in 1966. And when we lived in exile in Egypt with my mother and 2 siblings, we never saw him. He was in Guinea-Conakry, and we never saw him. He only wrote letters to us, and that was about it. So I didn't know the man at all, and there's no really emotional connection there. But of course, being the son of such a great person who's larger than life, obviously will put some, not pressure, it doesn't put pressure on me, but kind of makes you reflect on his life of a great man, especially that he comes from very humble background. So it's kind of interesting to see such a village boy, if I may put it that way, to grow up to be an international figure who represented not only Ghana, not only Africa, but the whole Black race. So it's very humbling to be the son of such a leader. But at the same time, I'm aware of his position. I'm aware of his struggles, political struggles, the sacrifices he made, the sacrifices we made as his kids, his wife and all that. And also put in the big context, I appreciate the good part of Nkrumah and also the bad part of Nkrumah. So I try to be as objective as possible. And of course, I'm used to when you debate Nkrumah, you realize that I never refer to him as my father because I think he's the father of a nation. So I'm open to discussions and criticism and all of that.
Yeah, but I'm so curious. Of course, still you are his son. What emotions go through when you hear this debate every year?
I'm not a very emotional person, so not really much because I understand. I grew up from a young age. I started reading books that were actually against Nkrumah. The first political book I read was by Lee Okran, one of the leaders of the 1966 coup, which completely condemned Nkrumah and so on. I also used to look through cartoons that were running down Nkrumah. I'm not too sure what it was, Ganata or something of the sort, mocked Nkrumah completely and so on. Before I started reading Nkrumah's books and learning about the man and so on. So I think I keep an open mind, look at both sides of the coin. I try to be as objective as I can.
Something that the president said on Sunday when he delivered his national address on the Founders' Day, S'. He says, I speak to you this evening, rejecting completely the notion that Ghana was founded by one man. You agree with him?
Oh, definitely not. I think what the president completely misses is that Nkrumah was one man, but he represented millions of Ghanaians. And that was exactly the grassroots connection Nkrumah had with the masses. He was brought in by the UGCC. He was active in the Pan-African movement in the UK after I had left the US. And I would later kind of go into his 10 years in the US because I think that's what made Nkrumah. So they brought him in, and they needed his help. And it was, the UGCC was the biggest political movement, but its presence across the country was not big enough. I think, if I remember correctly, they were just active in 6 constituencies or so across the country. And Nkrumah came, he did the legwork, went across the country, mobilized people, energized the whole struggle for independence, and kind of took over the leadership. After breaking away and forming his CPP, took the largest chunk of he created the mass movement. So obviously when he broke away, the majority went with him, and he convincingly won the 51, 54, and 56 elections. So the point is that what the president is missing is that Nkrumah is not one man. Nkrumah represents millions of Ghanaians. And it's that elitist mentality and entitlement. Because quite recently, I gave an interview, or granted an interview concerning this subject. And I was saying, I guess he's caught up in the emotions of the past. And I'm very sensitive to it because you see, it was a difficult period for Ghana. I was a baby then, but I mean, Ghanaians who lived at the time. And the political violence that emerged from the rivalry of the UP and CPP. Eventually, I think I blame both sides, the political violence. In Nkrumah, yes, there were several attempts on his life. Started with a bomb in Newtown where he lived, his residence. But the introduction of the PDA, I think also from Nkrumah's side, he was trying to arrest the violence. But from the opposition side, many became victims. And I always say, and that's why I earlier said I'm very sensitive to it, is that 3 out of the big 6 ended up in political detention under Nkrumah, Obichebe Lamte, Dankwa himself, and Akwaje, who actually suggested Nkrumah's name to come and become the general secretary. 2 of them, JB Dankwa and Obichebe Lamte, died in political detention, which is a very sad thing for Ghana. But the thing is that, so I'm sensitive when people come from that family.
Yeah, but you make that point about JB Dankwa and co dying in prison, all because of the struggle for independence. And yeah, you disagree with the president when he says one man did not found Ghana, and this is a collective effort.
Yeah, but my point is that, so I'm sensitive to the emotions expressed by Nana Akufo-Addo because of what happened to JB Dankwa. And I'm sensitive to the others who also ended up in political detention under Nkrumah. Because Nkrumah, at the end of the day, takes responsibility for it.
So Ghana was not founded by one man then? I mean, if you believe and you are sensitive towards that.
No, okay.
That Ghana wasn't founded by one man.
Nkrumah led Ghana to independence. When Nkrumah came back to Ghana, he was invited back, but he changed the dynamics of the struggle. So in many ways, Nkrumah, we don't have an issue with Nkrumah leading Ghana to independence. The issue about the founder. But there's a history behind the founder. And as I was saying earlier, 51 head of government business, 52 prime minister. He led Ghana to independence in 57. 1960, he ran against Dankwa, the presidential elections, and was elected as president. And Ghana became a republic, very significant. So the Queen was no longer the head of state. The British national was not the head of state of Ghana, but a Ghanaian. So that is when the introduction of the founder came in, and Nkrumah captured that. So in a sense, we have to understand where the founder is coming from. And I'm saying there's really nothing to argue about or complain about. It was the one man, because he led Ghana to independence, and he came to be the symbol of not only our liberation, political liberation and independence, but also being our first head of state and our first president. So I don't think I have a problem with that. The point is that it doesn't mean others did not contribute. The big 6, their name, their role is there, recognized in our history. Nobody's taken that away from them. They all served some jail time under the British, including Nkrumah himself. So nobody can take that struggle away from them.
Yeah, do you disagree that the fight for independence was a collective effort?
The fight for independence started before all the big 6 came to be involved.
That is precisely the president's point. That's why he goes all the way back to Aborigines Right Protection Society to say it started way before, and so acknowledge all the contributors to the struggle.
Then why 4th of August? Why the big 6? Then we might as well include every Ghanaian. So the point is that Nkrumah, as a founder, represented all Ghanaians and that struggle because he emerged as the leader and he led us to that independence and became our first head of state and president. So I think there shouldn't be too much debate about it. The other thing is that the president should realize that we all recognize the role of the Big Six and the role of all other ordinary Ghanaians who also contributed, those who lost their lives and all that. So I think it's unnecessary for us to go into that debate, and it should be singular, founder. And I think President Mills did well when he reintroduced it, because after the coup of '66, of course, they saw Founders Day and all that was thrown away. But Professor Mills did well, and I was with him when he campaigned in Nkrumah's hometown, when he made that promise that he was going to make Nkrumah's birthday a public holiday, and he did. But my problem, and I stated that a few days ago in another interview, was that the committee was formed, and there was no member from the MPP or the opposition then. And I think that created also a problem because you need to debate with people in opposition too. And that's part of my problem when we go back to history and Nkrumah introducing a one-party state. That's some of my critique or criticism of Nkrumah is that he kind of shut the door on opposing views. And I think we should always keep opposing views open. We should respect opposing views, even if they are in the minority. So I think that was the problem also Professor Mills did. So in a sense, people in the MPP or the UP from the UP tradition felt slighted. And that's why when they came back to power, they felt that, okay, in 2016, then now it's their turn. They can also do whatever they want. But they ended up making so many mistakes, like 1st July, which is of very much big significance to Ghana's history. You don't make it, it's no longer a public holiday. And I'm glad that John Mahama says that when he comes back to power, he's going to change that.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
But I have a concern with the back and forth thing. I think we need to rise above that.
So let's put that to bed now. It's been back and forth. You have the MPP come and they change the holiday laws to make, founders apostrophe a holiday, and then Nkrumah's birthday is no longer a holiday. You're now telling me that John Mahama indeed had said so, that he also will come in. How do you resolve this once and for all in a way that both parties accept that this is what is going to be going for? What's your proposition?
Well, I think we can resolve it by going back to history and understanding our history well without trying to manipulate our history. So as I said, if Nkrumah led us to independence, Nkrumah became our first president, head of state, let's give him the founder being that symbol of being the founder. And it's not for Nkrumah as a person. After all, he's long gone. He died way back in 1972. It's a question about Nkrumah representing us as Ghanaians. So when it's a Founders Day, we're celebrating Nkrumah's birthday. It's not even that birthday. It's not even Nkrumah's, probably his birthday. It was not even sure of the year or even the date. But these are just symbols for us to recognize our efforts to be independent, and then being independent and taking responsibility for our affairs and our destiny and so on as a people.
While you do
once
that,
upon a time, represented the face. He was the face of that.
Yeah, yes, he was a face. So if you're saying that, are you suggesting then that we should go back to Nkrumah's birthday as it used to be as a holiday, as a Founders Day?
I believe so.
Okay.
But so, let me give you another argument that you understand where I'm coming from. So, for example, the Kotoka International Airport. People argue that, but Kotoka overthrew Nkrumah, the '66 coup. So why should we put his face or his name in the entrance to the gateway to Ghana? But my argument is that, as people had said, that, look, it is part of our history. So we cannot also do away with the '66 coup. So whether negative or positive, it is part of our history. So there's no problem. We can maintain the Kotoka. I don't have a problem with the Kotoka International Airport because it was part of our history. So you see, it's give and take in terms of looking at our political history, and that the country, yes, had people who supported Nkrumah and what he represented, and others who were against Nkrumah and what they represented. So we need to balance it out. But in balancing it out, it doesn't mean that we have to rewrite history or manipulate history.
Yeah, I mean, so, you think that this government is rewriting, manipulating history?
Yes, definitely it is. I think President Akufo-Addo is manipulating
which specific part of what they've done is a manipulation of our
the
history?
4th August. The 4th August is a glaring manipulation.
How is that? But those are historical days. You just talked about is part of our history. The formation of the Aborigines Right Protection Society is part of our history. 1947 formation of UGCC is part of our history. How is that manipulation?
It is, but we can't celebrate every moment of our history. We have to look at the highlights or the significant moments. And I'm saying Nkrumah gave us those significant moments. He changed the dynamics when he was brought in. So let's give him that. And if other days, you remember even there was a whole controversy around the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, that people felt with this current or recent renovation, that there was going to be a park within the mausoleum, the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, that was going to involve the Big Six. And people kicked strongly against it. And somehow I think the government gave up that idea. So these are the manipulations that nothing stops us from, or nothing stops the Akufo-Addo government from building a park for the Big Six. But leave in Kwame Nkrumah's mausoleum for Nkrumah. So sometimes that's what we need to do, recognizing everybody, but also we are not all the same. Our contribution is not the same. It will be really unjust to say that Nkrumah's contribution is equal to the contribution of the other 5 in the Big Six.
It's not equal.
Totally ridiculous.
So Nkrumah's contribution is not equal to the others.
No, he was by far ahead of the others.
And the others who died
not
in prison.
Not only Ghana, but the whole of Africa.
Yeah, I get it, but we are talking about Ghana here. Even you acknowledge that
yes,
others who fought with him actually died in the process. You're saying still that his contribution is greater than those who actually laid down their lives for this country, who actually died in the process.
We all contributed. So many people contributed, but Nkrumah's contribution was massive.
Even more so than those who actually died in the process?
Yes.
Including the soldiers who were shot when they marched and protested.
Yes, sir.
The 28th February incident, including those.
Yes, the 28th February. They were marching for their own personal interest. Nkrumah's vision Nkrumah was fighting for every Ghanaian and even every African. So his mission was much broader. And I've said in the past, it doesn't go down well with people, but Kwame Nkrumah, the name Kwame Nkrumah is actually bigger than Ghana. And not because of him as a person, but because of the ideas he represented. This man represented decolonization. This man was the first to talk about new colonialism. And this man was talking about African unity, far way ahead of his time. So it is the ideas of Kwame Nkrumah that make him so unique. So you cannot, but that is not to say that Nkrumah did not have his faults. I'm the first to point out those faults. And even a lot of people, it doesn't go down well with people when I criticize Nkrumah for the PDA, introduction of the PDA, when I criticize Nkrumah for the one-party state and so on. But the fact is that his name is big, his contribution is massive, that you can't take that away. But we don't need to go back to the era. I think that's our history now.
Yeah, and we'll go forward. I guess it's a history, but it's a debate in the moment, in the current.
I don't think it's a debate. Well, I was in Ghana last month, and when the running mate now to the NPP.
Yeah, I'll come to that. I mean, I'll come to that whole controversy, but give me a quick second on this. This current government has memorialized Nkrumah's birthday. Isn't that enough?
I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with trying to manipulate history. And that's the introduction of the 4th August as a public holiday, and then taking away the 1st of July. I think those are manipulations of our history, which is unacceptable.
Okay, let me ask you then. Do you then believe that recognizing multiple or placing others in the struggle in the same pedestal as Nkrumah in the march towards independence dilutes Dr. Nkrumah's legacy?
No, it does not. But I'm saying it just points to those who are trying to manipulate our history and our past. And I'm saying that, and I'm not saying this because I'm Nkrumah's son, because I don't even say I'm Nkrumah's son, and I don't even act or behave like I'm Nkrumah's son. I'm a very simple, down-to-earth person. But I recognize the history and our past. And I feel that it is unfair to manipulate that history and that past. When you talk of Kwame Nkrumah's name, I mean, how was he voted ahead of Nelson Mandela with all the popularity of Nelson Mandela at that time? Nkrumah belonged to was a couple of decades ahead of Mandela. And yet at the time when Nkrumah was voted African of the Millennium ahead of Mandela, it is precisely because of what he stood for, decolonization and African unity. Mandela made sacrifice 27 years of his life, all right, but Mandela represented just one tiny part of Africa, South Africa. Nkrumah represented the whole of Africa. Nkrumah's face became the face of Africa, was recognized globally as the face of Africa. So we as Ghanaians need to give him that credit and recognize him. And not because of him. It makes us, by recognizing Nkrumah, we become proud. Older people will tell you that those who were students in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, every African said he was a Ghanaian because of Kwame Nkrumah, because of the respect people gave him and Ghana in that during those times. I mean, look at how small Ghana is compared to other African countries. But at some point under Nkrumah, Ghana was the leading light of Africa. The black star on our flag, that's the Pan-African symbol of Pan-Africanism. I think if I'm correct, there are only two countries with that symbol, and it shows you the depth of the leaders of those two countries, Kwame Nkrumah and Cabral of Guinea-Bissau.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just out of personal curiosity. In the Nkrumah family, do you guys talk about this the way we do? And when you see the nation very caught up in this debate, do you, among yourselves, talk about it? And what's the conversation like when you sit around the table?
We argue a lot with my sister, Samia. We argue a lot over Nkrumah because she seemed to be extremely, I think, from my opinion, very biased. And she's nothing wrong with what Nkrumah did. I see his faults and point them out, and that brings very heated debates between the two of us. Recently, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, I was talking to my brother in Egypt, Gamal, and somehow Gaddafi came into the conversation. And I was telling Gamal that, yeah, I mean, I never really respected Gaddafi because of he didn't have the intellectual depth to lead Africa. He was bankrolling the African AU and so on. But he didn't have that intellectual depth like Nkrumah did. So for me, he would not have my respect as a leader to move Africa forward. So we talk about, yes, among ourselves about Nkrumah, about Ghana, about Africa. Sometimes we understand each other's points of views, but sometimes we also have very heated debates.
And let me ask you then, something that you wanted to touch on. Last month, when the running mate to the vice president, when he was introduced to the population, if you like, on the back of his selection as a running mate, he passed a comment that became very controversial indeed. And you said you were in a country when this happened. He compared your father to the current president. He says the current president has done far better and been more successful. He's the most successful president in our history. And specifically mentions your father. What was your reaction when you heard that?
I think that was ridiculous, but I understood what he meant. He was simply trying to please his masters, coming from the UP tradition. And he is someone who's now a young man, made the running mate. Possibly in the future, he could be leading the MPP. So he wanted to please the MPP UP tradition. And that's what they have done for years, running down Nkrumah. And I'll give you a very interesting example. Buzia's daughters, some time back, were launching a documentary on their father, Dr. Buzia, who was prime minister then in between 70 to 72. He won the 69 elections. So they were launching this, and they invited me, and I was there in the audience at what we refer to as the Pink Lady, the State House, is it? And then, interestingly, Stevie Wonder was there as well. And then she started, the ambassador to Brazil now, I believe. She started by trying to recapture the day Nkrumah was overthrown, and was telling the audience how the father, that's Dr. Buzia, was jumping around and celebrating the overthrow of Nkrumah. I understand that from the Ghanaian point of view, so I was okay with that. But in my mind, I was thinking of how embarrassing that would be to Steve Wonder, because most of these African Americans see Nkrumah in a very high place. So if somebody's running down Nkrumah that way, I just couldn't figure out what was going in his mind, or on his mind. And the interesting thing is that I know he has a close relationship with the Bozia's family of the daughters. And I think recently even he became a Ghanaian citizen or so. But
yes.
I was embarrassed for him, not for me, because from the Ghanaian point of view, I have lived through it and understood the division in our country between CPP and UP, that rivalry and so on. But for an outsider who they see Nkrumah in that light, as a bigger, larger than life and all that, I felt so embarrassed for him that he would hear this coming from a fellow.
Did you feel embarrassed for Matthew Poku Prempeh when he heard that?
No, I understood what he was doing. He was just trying to please his masters. They put him in this high position to represent them, so he was just playing by the gallery. You remember, after the 66 coup, Nkrumah's name was dragged through the gutters, the filthiest of gutters, for almost 5 years. Ghanaians were bombarded that Nkrumah was evil, Nkrumah was this, Nkrumah was that. He did all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, Nkrumah's name still stands higher than everybody else. And why is it so? It is because of his vision and his contribution. And even what Nkrumah did, even the physical things that he left behind for Ghana, a lot of it were neglected after the coup, but still we benefit from things like the Sombo Dam. I'll tell you an interesting thing. When I used to then live in Ghana for a long period, when I returned from Europe for my studies in the late 80s, and I used to travel to Tema by the beach road, I used to get goose pimples, or when I drove past the Tema township, because it gives you an idea of what Nkrumah was trying to do for this country, the infrastructure that he was leaving behind, or he left behind. And up till today, what have we done really beyond the significant things that Nkrumah did? Not much. Yes, others came to do a bit, or do their bit, but Nkrumah left so much of physical legacy, let alone his ideas that not only decolonized Africa, or helped decolonize Africa. Many of these liberation fighters and the leaders of other African countries came to Ghana. Ghana became the Mecca of the liberation struggle. World revolutionaries, Che Guevara, Malcolm X, all kind of deep characters. George Padmore came and worked with Nkrumah. The boys came and Nkrumah was trying to put him as to head the Encyclopedia Africana project.
Well, I mean,
so these brains, Arthur Lewis and so on, all these brains came to Ghana, were attracted to Ghana.
You mentioned those illustrious names, and we're currently 4 months away to an election, and it's still a battle over Ghana's future, as it was when Nkrumah became first president and when he was overthrown. Do you see any possibility that any of these two parties, and again, because you have 4 months to go to major elections, and these matters that we talk about now, historically, are so very relevant today about which of these two parties can take us to the promised land as Nkrumah had dreamt back in the day. Which of these two parties would you put your money on?
Oh, I mean, in terms of winning elections? In
terms of being in a position to best actualize a dream, that Ghanaian dream, if there ever was one, that Nkrumah had?
Well, so to answer that question, let's go back in history. I don't know if you've read Nkrumah's autobiography, Kwame Nkrumah Ghana.
Yes.
Okay, there's a chapter devoted to his American years. And I think it's important, and I personally want to work on a script for a movie that can capture that journey, Pan-African journey, and then focusing on Nkrumah and how he developed the Pan-African journey. You realize that people like Marcus Garvey were the first to inspire Nkrumah in those days. But later, Nkrumah became involved and active politically with historians, activists, political activists, intellectuals, academics, and so on. And that was the time. At that time, there was the Pan-African agenda, which was actually started. Yes, there were people in Africa who were working towards our independence. But our decolonization, really, the people who really started and led that struggle were from outside in the diaspora. And they were serious academics, intellectuals, and so on. And those are the people who inspired Nkrumah to develop that vision And he worked also with them, with the Pan-African Congress, remember, the fifth one in the UK, Manchester, and so on. So it is important for us to understand how Nkrumah developed that dream and that vision for Ghana and Africa, decolonization and then African unity. We have to trace his steps back to where it all started. And I am fortunate to have lived in the US for almost 10 years now, the same period of time that Nkrumah lived in between 35 and 45. And when I look around, what will inspire a Ghanaian, an African like me, in the same position Nkrumah was in the 30s and 40s? Pan-Africanism inspired him. What will inspire me today? The only thing close to an inspiration will be the Black Lives Matter movements. And that is more or less a continuation of the civil rights in the 60s and 70s in the US. But this Black Lives Matter, what is it really about? Police brutalities, killing of Black people, especially young Black men. So what has that really got to do with us in Africa? How does that inspire an African in the US? Very little. So you see, we need to find a way of getting inspiration to continue with Nkrumah's vision, Pan-African vision.
Yeah, okay.
Because it seems that Pan-African vision is lost on us.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for the answer to my question, which is which of these two parties delivers that?
I'm coming to the answer. I'm coming to the answer. You see, he got inspiration from the Pan-African vision that was at the time. We cannot find that inspiration outside. We have to look within our setting on the African continent. So now looking, how does that leadership emerge? What are the challenges? You could see that now there are pockets of coup d'etats in Africa. And I'm not for a moment suggesting coup d'etats in Ghana, because we've had a very difficult experience, June 4, December 31st, and so on, which is quite recent. I was in secondary school then. So I have a good recollection. There are many people who are older and know a bit of that history. And I'm not for a moment suggesting going back to the military rule. But I'm saying those pockets of military, there's one significant thing through what is happening, and that is they want to kick out the French influence or in these countries, which is very progressive. Maybe the method could be wrong, but I'm saying it's progressive. We in Ghana, because now coming to your question, we in Ghana have embraced the multi-party system of democracy since 1992, and we've had the political stability. But unfortunately, and as I was pointing out earlier, I was in Ghana last month, and the economy is in a mess. And the average Ghanaian, I don't even know how the average Ghanaian survives. How he can make ends meet. How does he pay rent? How does he pay the bills and all that? And you have a vast number of unemployed people, majority youth. So the two things, from my point of view, that the political leader that's coming into office after the next election, they focus on two main things: corruption, because that, and taking inspiration from going back to June 4, corruption is one thing we have to address seriously.
Yeah,
so
okay,
whether it's Bamia, whether it's Mahama.
Yeah, but in the interest of time then, I mean, so you've laid out a foundation. So which of these two parties delivers that?
Okay. And then employment.
Yeah.
Corruption and employment. But it has to be done seriously. In the past, we've had governments coming in and they don't address the corruption in the past.
Yeah, I mean,
nobody is dealt with. So between the two, NDC is likely to win because we've had this cycle of 8 years.
True.
So that is nothing, will not be surprising, and especially with the economic hardship.
So that is what our political history predicts. But for you, which of the two?
And the economic situation shows that it's very difficult. So I believe Ghanaians will opt for a change.
Yeah, but is the NDC best placed to actualize the things you just enumerated: corruption, the economy, employment?
Historically, the NDC comes from a party or a tradition that had a crusade against corruption. So there's no reason why NDC cannot champion, or the NDC leadership cannot champion, a fight against corruption. So your money is on the NDC then in this year's elections? No. Yes, by the economic hardship, yes. But I'm saying that in the past, NDC did not prove that they have the political will to fight corruption. I had that problem with Professor Mills, and I had the same problem with John Mahama. So that's a big question, whether John Mahama can now turn around and become a different leader. when you're talking about MPP, there was corruption under Kufuor. There was this corruption now. I mean, will Bamia somehow, if he is to win, can he now turn the tables around and decide that
you think, and I ask this question only because you joined the NDC before and you left.
I mean, some of us were frustrated because it became business as usual. And I didn't see any change. And I mean, even 2012, even when I had left the NDC, I was shocked that NDC even won the 2012 election based on their performance. But it looks like in Ghana, we gave you a second chance. And that's the 8 years. But if the economy is still, they're not making any progress or big progress.
So that was in 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So that in total, we're talking about, it's been 12 years since. Do you see enough in the NDC to say they've changed?
No. The problem is we don't seem to be making headway. The problem is leadership. But that's what I was trying to explain to you earlier, is that let's understand how someone like Nkrumah was able to bring about so much change and inspiration. It is because of the Pan-African agenda that he got inspiration from. Now, let's fast forward to the Rawlings era. He emerged on the political scene because of this whole corruption that had engulfed the country, the same as today. So he spoke the language of the ordinary man. They saw him as the champion of the interest. The students back then at the university had to sacrifice a year of studies to carry cocoa sacks and all that. People were going out weekends to clean gutters and so on. We've lost all that. So that was, again, another inspirational leadership. But unfortunately, Rawlings did not have the intellect to back it. So people around him who should have pushed him, Kwesi Bochwe,
I know we spent quite a bit of time talking about the history. I want to talk about the now and the future. And I'm asking you, do you see that? You say, I mean, the current economic condition.
So we have to be inspired. The leadership has to get inspiration.
Do you see the inspiration? Do you see the inspiration in John Mahama? You believe the NDC will win?
I just told you that both parties have failed over the years. But the point there's no other option. It's MPP or NDC for now. So.
I mean, you said there's no other option, but there's a CPP, the party of your father.
No, that long collapsed. From 92, there were so many efforts to reunite the CPP and so on. But the problem was the NDC. The NDC had taken over their political constituency. And everywhere in the world, we have the left and the right. So NDC captured their constituency. So there was no space for CPP to operate. And you're right that most of the Nkrumahs are within the NDC. I could say without exaggeration, 80% of NDC members would have been CPP or Nkrumahs in their political orientation. So for me, I don't have a problem seeing NDC as the new CPP. The problem goes down to leadership.
I mean, so for you, I mean, this is something I need to clarify. So for you, the NDC is the new CPP?
Yeah, ideologically, definitely. But the point is that you need the leadership to put it on the right path. And I'm saying that leadership has to find inspiration from our situation. As Nkrumah had inspiration from outside, as Rawlings had inspiration. And to me, the connection with the ordinary Ghanaian, the grassroots, that is the constituency I want to champion.
So you boil this down. So you boil this down to leadership of the NDC.
Yes. And MPP.
And MPP. I mean, I'm just focusing on, because you say the NDC is a new CPP, and if that's the case, then they closely embodies all the ideals and the values that the CPP, that your father, of course, founded, would have exuded and showed. If John Mahama wasn't the leader and somebody else, would you have said you are ready to return to their fold?
No, but who's that person? The point is, the problem is not one individual returning to NDC. The problem is recognizing the leadership, that we as Ghanaians can see that leadership is committed. And I was telling you earlier, fighting corruption, that should be the first step. Employment for people, young people especially, that should be the second step. Those two alone, if the new leadership can address those two things and show commitment and political will to do that, I think we'll be making headway. Now, if you're looking at new colonialism and how the West or other countries now are interested in our resources, African resources, that is a much bigger and more complicated issue. But that can be addressed later. We can't address it immediately.
Okay. I mean, will you, on December 7, will Sekou Nkrumah, will you return home to vote?
I'm not returning to home, but I'll be returning shortly, not to vote, because I think I have to reorganize myself. I've been away for too long. I've lost touch with so many things. But I'll be returning to Ghana.
But you'll be voting on December 7th?
No, I think it's too short a time, and I don't even know when I'm returning back. I mean, I've been away for 10 years, so it will take a while to readjust.
And your verdict on the CPP is that they've collapsed, as in they simply have lost it?
Yeah. I think these are vehicles. CPP was a political vehicle Nkrumah used at the time of the independence struggle. So it doesn't mean that we have to use the same vehicle. I mean, life is all about change. Life is dynamic, and so is politics. So the point is to recognize a vision. That's what I was trying to tell you. We need to all of us need to see where we can get inspiration and vision from. And I'm saying this time around, we are not getting help from outside. We have to do it ourselves. So let's go back in time, in our history, and find out how those leaders who emerged to at least inspire the masses. And I talked about Nkrumah, I talked about Rawlings. How did those people were able to inspire the masses? Let's see how we can reshape a leadership that can inspire the masses so that the masses are behind them, but they have to also come up with the right ideas, right commitment, and also to be genuine people who want to lead the country.
I need to ask you, since I have you, I'm talking about finding the inspiration and the leadership. Your sister tried once to lead the CPP. Hopefully she had won to replicate, if you like, that Nkrumah's verb, etc. Is Sekou Nkrumah even tempted to enter into that same arena and possibly lead this revival, this inspiration that you've been talking about?
But not CPP. It doesn't have to be CPP.
No, I mean, I'm not even talking about CPP. Any vehicle you choose, is something that you've thought about?
You see, leadership, you have to look in the mirror and be convinced that that person you see in the mirror has the capacity, has the intellectual depth, and has the vision, the inspiration to become a leader.
You have all that, don't you?
We are still looking, I'm still searching for that inspiration. I mean, we all have some ideas of how we want the country to go. We all have some ideas of how we want Ghana to be. I identify with my political constituency, and that's the ordinary Ghanaian. That's what I'm interested in developing. But the point is that I have to have that inspiration, and I'm not too sure I found the inspiration. It's something that the leadership has to find it. If Sekou finds that inspiration, you will find, or you see in the future Sekou leading a political movement, a political party, and taking it, having the will, the commitment, and the confidence to do so. It cannot be artificial. That's the problem I had with my sister when she came back to Ghana, because I realized that she didn't know much. She was being manipulated by people to come into the country when she had no idea. And leadership of the CPP and so on.
Your sister won't be happy with you to claim on national television that she was manipulated by people.
Oh, but that's a fact. I speak my mind, and I want to believe that I speak the truth. The fact of the matter, that's what happened. And she had a position of leadership in CPP, but the CPP did not change. It was the same because she didn't have an understanding of our political history.
I mean, and who are those who manipulated her?
Oh, I don't think it's necessary to mention names. But I mean, if you think about it, who was in the leadership of the CPP at the time? Which government was in power at the time?
But to what end, though?
And those should answer
to what end? To what end would they manipulate her?
Oh, are you not aware that all these smaller parties are manipulated by either NDC or MPP? That has been the issue since the 92 election.
So your sister was also manipulated by the NDC and MPP?
Definitely so. Definitely so.
Is it the NDC? Because since you say they are the new CPP?
You remember I asked you the question, who was in power when she was brought to Ghana? Who was leading the CPP when she was brought to Ghana? Those should answer your questions.
I mean, am I right to say that the NDC was in power at the time that she was brought? No,
NDC was not in power.
Okay. The MPP?
Yes, MPP was in power.
So you're saying that the MPP manipulated your sister then?
And who was the leader of the MPP? He served in government of the MPP for so many years.
You want to...
We don't need to mention names. The question is that there have been manipulations by both the big political parties to influence elections and so on. So if you don't have a good understanding of those dynamics, you can fall into their grip or you become manipulated by them. But that is not really an issue. My point is that, because you kept on asking about CPP, and I said that she was given the opportunity, but nothing changed, because it just cannot change. You have to understand, have a bigger understanding of the bigger picture.
And in a minute, as we wrap up, so NDC, MPP, and the solution. What is the solution? And you say Nkrumah created the CPP as a vehicle to deliver a certain agenda. So the end was very clear. How do we create another vehicle to deliver on the development that we've been seeking since independence, if it's not the NDC and the MPP? How do we achieve that? Briefly.
So, going to employment, I said the CPP, what did Nkrumah use? He used the socialist path. We don't have to use the word socialist or socialism today, but let's use the public sector. And I'm not saying that I have 100% confidence in the public sector. Public sector has been very weak over the past couple of years, or decades. But the problem is that because there's not enough commitment from government to really push the public sector or energize the public sector. So that should be the focus of a serious government that comes to power. Because the private sector, as the engine of growth, I'm not buying into that slope. It has to be the private sector. But the private sector has to have serious commitment and backing from the government of the day or the leadership of the day. And as I said, corruption. Let's go back to the inspiration from June 4 and December 31st. I'm not talking about political violence, but I'm talking about people who dip their hands into government funds, people who use their positions, people who, for their own personal interests, people who are into galamsey, people who are in government involved in galamsey, people who are in government and buying government land and all that, or government factories. Those people should be punished.
Okay.
We should have a political leadership that is willing to punish those people so it doesn't continue going forward. And I'm saying if we address those two things alone, we'll make progress. But there must be a political will and determination. And it means that if those around you are working against you, you have to have the political strength to push them away and call the shots. Because the leader, the buck ends with you.
Yeah, I am grateful that you joined us for this conversation.
I wish we had more time.
Yes, I wish too. Enjoy the rest of your evening, by the way. And that's Sekou Nkrumah there. He is the son of the founder of this republic, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Enjoy the rest of your evening.